but to welcome people who haven't been here before. This idea of the Sesame Research Group is about trying to ground research in a norm. Rather than setting it up to the high towers of an academic setting, it's about making it ordinary and in the remit of every soul. And somehow in our world there's been a split between those who think in a certain way and those who feel or intuit get left behind. And it's a kind of a Sesame, something the Sesame Institute holds dearly because of the dream base that we come from. And if you don't know about that, you can research it for yourself and find out about it. But the idea of these evenings, which are about every 2 or 3 months, is to create a place where we can start as ordinary people to encourage each other, to write, to think differently, to push what already exists and speak from the inside place, to honour that and give it a place. So this is about our 6th or 7th. We've been running for about 2 or 3 years. And there's been a small group of people, which Glenn Connor is one, but I'm just naming him because he's not present tonight, but next time he will be, nothing like spotlighting, who have been here regularly. And the idea came to me because it was what shall we do in the new term? It was, what about people who have been here regularly, heard presentations, but haven't yet had a voice here? And if this group is about promoting our early research, how about having 4 little presentations? So I asked 4 people who were regulars, and they said yes, and we thought it would be a harvest. However, farmers and harvest, and you never know what's going to root and shoot. We had a foursome harvest until yesterday evening, when one of our presenters, Bazia, had to go home to Poland for a family matter. And Esther, our Sesame Institute fundraiser, who was going to give your talk on money, is not well. So we're going to make good. There's something about replenishing the harvest. What may look as if it's rotting may still have life in it. And Bazia has sent her paper, which I will read, and Esther has sent a whole lot of information, which we're going to harvest you with as you go out. So all is well, and we'll see where we go. So I think what we'd like to do is just, or what I'd like to do is say, for us just to go round and maybe give our name and one sentence that doesn't need to be logical, but just something about your response to being here, interested in researching the creative. So no tall order, huh? So I'll give you a moment just to reflect. Don't think too much, let it spill more. Order of the programme. So our first 15-minute slot is our Cath, being CHIRON, healer, teacher and archer, aiming at the research audience target, Cath BUTLER. And she says, I will talk about my experience as a researcher during the Sesame Terpsichore research project and how I reconciled being true to our therapeutic Sesame vocation with meeting the demands of an academic journal. Without further ado, I give you the Chair of the Sesame Council and researcher. Cath, over to you.
Well, is it all right if I remain seated?
You can do whatever you like.
My son's partner suggested to me that as it was Halloween, I ought to come, in costume. And I've just been to a conference I've been to the last 4 years called the Musical Brain, which is very much relevant to my area of research, and she thought I should come as a brain. It kind of blew my mind, trying to think of how I would dress as a brain, but I haven't managed that, I'm afraid. Really, with the subject that I have here, I should have been a centaur, but that's just as more difficult, perhaps. I understand that CHIRON was very particular, the centaur was very particular as a centaur, and that he is represented as having not just human down to there and then horse, but the whole human body, and then the horse's body stuck on the back of that, which is quite unusual, but that is the way he is represented in art. So he's got, it's interesting, it seems to indicate he has everything, full humanity, but at the same time this extra thing of being a centaur. So quite interesting. And the things that the three aspects or roles of CHIRON that I was going to speak about are, as you see here, healer, a teacher, and an archer. And I should say first the CHIRON actually, you know, it's a Greek word for hand, but it also means somebody who's, you know, who's good with their hands, somebody who can use the hands. And he used the hands in many ways, but for healing and for, I don't know about teaching, but for archery, yes. So again, many skills are involved here. He was the wounded healer, the wise teacher, and the skilled archer. Now, if you've trained with Sesame, it's very likely you will know about him already, but I'll just say a little bit more about that. The wounded healer is a very important figure for Sesame because we're all wounded healers, and we all have our own wounds, which, as you know, we explore when we do the training. We explore the wound and the healing, and there is healing for ourselves in it, in our own training as healers. So I think it's a very suitable image for any Sesame practitioner. The wise teacher he was. It was thought he was wise, so wise, because he had some instruction from, if you don't mind mentioning him, Apollo and Artemis too, when he was young. And so Artemis, of course, you know, would probably have helped him with the archery, I expect. And Apollo helped him with various kinds of things, including music, I'm sure. When he became a teacher himself, he taught all sorts of heroes. And, you know, you'll have perhaps heard of some of his pupils, you know, like Achilles and Jason, and all sorts of people who went on wonderful quests or had rather awful fates before them, but were heroes of some sort. And it is said that he actually may have taught Dionysus. Now, I found this very interesting. I was just looking a bit more detail about him. Yes. And,
talk of Dionysus.
Dionysus is very
Get the wine out, yeah. Please sit down.
Please.
Welcome.
Yes. I was just talking about CHIRON as the wounded healer, the wise teacher, and the skilled archer, and saying that he is thought he may have taught Dionysus. In fact, it is said they may have loved one another. How much that love involved, I don't know, but and that Dionysus from him had you know, a great deal to do with music and dance. So I think that's rather good. So CHIRON's got everything really, but then the archer. Yes, well, that's what I take that to be is for us is something about focusing, about our focus, about not about killing anybody or, you know, murdering any other kinds of research or etc. But yay. So I said why we, as trained as Sesame practitioners, often because we are wounded and want to be healers, that's what we become. And that healer aspect is, of these aspects of CHIRON, to me is the absolute, you know, this is the primary thing. And it must be put before everything else, is the fact that we are the healers. Whatever else we do with Sesame, the healer has got to come first and everything that goes with that. Both, you know, as professional therapists and in our relationship with our clients, you know, honouring the client, always respecting, keeping the client, that's got to come first before any academic considerations, so to say. As a teacher now, so are we really teachers? Well, thinking of research and becoming, you know, becoming wise through our work, through our training and our work, but then wanting to teach. What is teaching? It is sharing what you know, sharing what you have learned. And I think that this is a big aspect of research, is wanting to share what you have learned. And we learn so much from our clients, not just from our doing the work. Obviously the work is, we are with the clients in our work. We learn together. And one of the things which really motivated me to research in the first place is in reading Oliver Sacks' book. I've outlined this in my article, if you want to see it. That Oliver Sacks wrote a book about music that showed examples of patients who had benefited from the music in certain ways. I mean, it included that. It also talked about all sorts of difficulties, hearing difficulties, amusia, and so on, and how this affects. Musicophilia, it's called. It's a wonderful book, and there are two things about it. Both, it related to the kind of thing I was becoming interested in showing in the research, which is to do music used therapeutically, not music therapy, music used in psychotherapy. And the other thing is that his way of doing this in the book is, you know, if you've read any Oliver Sacks, you know, he has lovely little case histories, little, not necessarily even a case history, but just lovely little vignettes or fuller histories, showing what has happened, you know, and explaining it in medical terms sometimes when he can, but not explaining it away, just saying music has this wonderful value. I'm not going to say science tells you everything why, no. The music is to be honoured, and in every time he talks about one of these patients, the patient is honoured. The patient is loved. And I thought, yes, that is just the way I want to do it. That it has to be in that way. That they are not statistics. They are not, for me, I can't do it that way. They are not numbers who responded A or B. Each one must be honoured for him or herself. So I thought, well, yes, I could do that with in this particular way we do it in Sesame. So what happened next was that, he led me on also to look at things in recent neuroscience that really accord very much with so much that we already understand in Sesame through Jungian things, through the symbolic, this, that, the other, and just from seeing the way things work, we understand it. Well, and neuroscience is going with us. It shows all sorts of interesting ways that the mind works and connects, and things to do with both music and movement, which I write about together because I can't separate the music and movement, have to be like that. So what was all this? Then, we learned, so I learned from my practice, and I wanted to pass that on. And then there's the question of the archer, carrying the archer, looking for the target, you know, aiming. What are we aiming for? What is the target? And, you know, how do we aim, and so. And then this Sesame Terpsichore Research project came along, and it had its own aims, which were to, among the aims, but that people should know more about Sesame, to get wider information out there about Sesame, and to the academic community or the research community particularly, and to show that Sesame research can be done. You know, it can be done without ruining anything that in our therapeutic, or well, let us say, not showing that it can, but finding out if it could, finding out if it could, and so that sort of clarified for me what I needed to do, because I needed to focus on those two things. So it helped me to get together the particular aims of the research project proposal that I submitted to the Sesame Terpsichore project panel. And so that was the first stage, actually, of the work. Submitting that to the panel, discussing it with them, and then going away and, you know, once they've said, okay, go ahead with that, working on it and producing a draft, which was then sent, and then had all kinds of comments, came back, submitted again. I've done, I think actually about half a dozen versions of this thing in the end. You know, bigger and smaller, and this way and that way, and reordering and adding and taking. This started in 2009, if you can believe it, with the proposal. But anyway, where are we? 2012, yes. Well, I'm still there. But I felt I'd written it finally, and the Sesame panel said, go with this, go with it. So then, I had to, the next thing I had to do once I resubmitted it was to find a journal that was the right journal. Oh, what's with there?
Welcome. There's a seat there, just in the middle of Cath's person.
I'll just go back to it. It's all right. It's all right. CHIRON he's a healer, a teacher, and now an archer, aiming at research, okay, looking for the target. But before I say about the journal, I'll just say how I had to go about the research in the first place, which, you know, you've got to decide what's going to be your research method. I mean, for me, it was clear the kind of thing it had to be, because what I wanted was to tell the story, and just to talk about the relationship the therapeutic relationship with the clients, the work that was done through that relationship, and how it affected them, and how this is a particularly Sesame thing. So I had to decide then what clients. I do both group and individual. Well, then it seemed good to have the group because it showed sort of classic Sesame situation with group work, and in which I would do things in the Sesame form that we have with, I don't need to tell you how it proceeds, but including all the bits, bridge over it, everything, main event, and going through that, but showing how I do that, particularly with a musical basis. But it's also, when I say a musical basis, it's a theme and music around that theme. And I do various kinds of themes. And some of the ones like we all do,
I think we're all here, Cath.
Okay. We need another chair.
Do we know? I thought there's those ones.
Okay, right, okay. Just talking about themes that I do in my work and how I decided what to use for my research. But, things like seasons or the kinds of things we do. But the particular one that I chose was very musically specific, which was my Vienna day, which I do, Vienna session, which I do quite often because it goes down terribly well. and I have a great selection of stuff, and I can use different things on different occasions, but with particular ones that I know are going to, sorry to say, it's going to reach the heart. So I thought, okay, well that's what I'll do. And then so I had to choose and read through all my, one of the things you've got to think about in all this is time scale, how long it's going to take. And reading through client notes of like 7 or 8 years worth, where I've been doing this thing, thinking which to choose or which day, how to do it, bits from here, bits from there. I decided on taking one session and then adding little notes from other sessions that were particularly relevant or illustrative for it. So that's what I did. Then of course you have to, there are ethical questions. You've got to think about the ethics of it. This is with use of music in Sesame therapeutic work with clients with dementia. So you've got particular ethical considerations you have to make there, and then you have to have permissions, of course, because these people are in a home, the group in a home, and so all that's very time-consuming stuff, actually. Then, of course, there's the literature review, the literature search, going through all the things that, trying to find all the things that are relevant to what I'm particularly trying to say, and try and see if it's ever been said before, and I'm just redoing something. But I might be redoing something, but doing it in my own way, in a way that's going to cast a new light on it. Right? It turned out there was only one Sesame article published in an academic journal which had to do with working with clients with dementia. Surprising, but it is so, because it's a big, work we do with clients. And that was about 1990 something, But this one with the specific emphasis on music and the relation to to music and science, the neuroscience research too, I thought was a different. So yeah, so that having done that, I mean that was all, of course, before. While I was before I gave the first draft submission, and as I say, then back, but again, submission again. Then you got the question of choosing a journal. Then. And you know, it's really quite difficult, actually, and it's a big thing, choosing a journal, because you can't just write the paper and send it off and say, yeah, what do you think of this? It's not like writing a novel and sending to the publisher. They've got a million, they've got a million pages of things you've got to go with. Where was it? There. That is the requirements for writing, for how you write the article, how you present it, what months, the way everything has to be done. And the tiniest little, and they say they will reject these things for not following these ridiculous little things. So and so must be in italics. Such and such must have 3 spaces before it. So, even to that level. And so the amount of going over and over that and checking it. So, fortunately, they have a nice little condensed version which I could send to the Sesame Terpsichore panel so that they didn't have to read the full story. But anyway, so all that, and then submission. But what I would really like to say before that is that I really couldn't have done any of this awfully well without my superb supervisor, and I can't say too much how important it is to have supervision which is particularly directed at this work, because my wonderful supervisor, Susie Thornton, who is, I mean, she used to teach Laban on the Sesame course at one time, and she's also, she's psychotherapist, she's a dancer, and moreover, I mean, I always felt I wanted to have supervision from her anyway, and this was a wonderful excuse. And then one time when I was talking to her, I found I'd already started my work a bit, because Laban is terribly important in this thing, you can understand. And people have not written about Laban that much, in research. And I found in an attic of an old junk shop in Vienna, I found this copy of a book of Laban's, you see, from the 1920s, with these terrific photographs of, people, naked people, and amazing kind of leaps and things they were doing. And so anyway, I brought this back, and it was in German, of course. And I brought it along to the Sesame AGM, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this time. And I said, and I showed it to Susie because I knew she was high up in the Laban Guild, you see. And she said, oh, yes, you see, and started reading it. I said, can you read German? Yes, she was born in Vienna. And she had to leave there in 1938. But she has relations there still. She's from a Viennese family, and she understood so well, just the very thing I was going to write about. So what could be better? Plus the fact that she's just she's very focused, she's really there, Choose your supervisor well when you do the research. For that, I was terribly lucky. So, meeting the demands of this academic journal, I can go on a little longer because can I do another 5 minutes?
Cath. Yes, you may.
Yeah, I've shown you all that stuff. I'd like to tell you that currently I just had the day before yesterday, I had a response from the journal. I submitted it to them on May the 20th, and they said it would be 4 to 6 weeks. And, you know, I didn't like pushing them, because it's as if I'm asking them a favour, you know, and you don't feel say, oh, you know, what are you doing? Where's my article? You know, what do you think about it? So I didn't do that. And people, academic friends said, oh, look, they're at the end of the summer term, they'll be busy. Now it's the summer break, you know. Now they're at the beginning of term, you know, so. But finally, people were saying, well, actually, I think you better write and see what's going on. So I was going to do that this week, and then I suddenly had a response from this, the editor of the journal, saying, oh, did you ever get the comments that were made? You know, and these were clearly done months ago. And he said, I looked through my sent, box, and I couldn't see it. And we've lost a number of things through the server's fault, you said. So, you know, so I immediately wrote back saying, oh yes, please, and I was going to write you this week because I was getting concerned. And he wrote back saying that he was mortified by this. When I read it first quickly, I thought he'd lost the article. And I thought, I don't know. But no, it was the feedback he'd lost. Hadn't sent to me. So, as I say, I don't know when it was written, but probably long, long ago. But now he tells me that for resubmission, I need to do it by November the 19th if I want to get into the next. This is just the kind of thing you might have to face, you know, I warn you. But on the other hand, you might have something, you know, quite a different experience, but these things are possible, be prepared. So you know, and I got it back, and I've got, Mary hasn't seen this yet. It only came the day before yesterday, and I've been sort of, you know, agonizing with Susie and everything, and I'm going to see her on Monday, and anyway, I wanted to tell you in any detail, but I have comments from 2 reviewers. This is a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Applied Arts and Health, which is a recent, it's only been going about 3 years. And I picked up a copy at the Stepping Stones, I think, one time. Somebody had left a couple of copies there, and I thought, oh, well, this looks just right. Applied Arts and Health. That's right for me. Anyway, so, but the first person has quite detailed things, that much of the page, but that much of the page. It's not a huge comment, that. Some detailed things which I can approach, spelling out further the ethics approval and spelling out love and fundamentals further, you know, this kind of thing. But she suggests here that she feels that it is written it's been translated, and that I probably need some help to become more confident in English. Peer-reviewed things are sent without, they don't know who you are, they don't know anything about you. You know, apart from the fact that, you know, that I have 4 degrees, I tutor pupils and help people writing essays and university dissertations. And I thought, crumbs! You know, if after all this, she thinks, you know, I read like something, and I thought maybe, you know, it was because I was writing about this Vienna session, and I put the title of some things in German, and I did translate them, but maybe she thought I was actually, you know, like an Austrian writer who had the piece on, you know, I mean, anyway. Some people might have been, you know, really distressed by that, but I just kind of thought, what? So there's nothing I can do about that. You know, she doesn't like the way I right. There's nothing I can do about that, but I can address a few things. But the other, you know, it requires a lot more work on language and form before we're ready for publication. You know, some key details missing, blah, blah, blah. The other person says that the paper is very interesting and creative. But yes, this first one didn't like the vignette, didn't understand the purpose of vignettes and so on. Second one says, paper is very interesting and creative, both in content, such as the case vignettes, and in structure, as in letting the vignettes speak the definition of the Sesame method. Opposite of number one. So although this style gives it an artistic Jungian feel, but it leaves out for me some important grounding because she feels that it was really good, it's just a good dance therapy. They don't know, it takes the participants through levels of discourse, convoluted experience, symbolic meaning-making, enactment, reflection, integration into new life behaviors, and seemingly as a primary therapist as well, all important. But why Sesame? Why need a new form name of creative expressive arts therapy? She thought that I was making up Sesame, that this is my suggestion, that we now have this new thing called Sesame that includes these features. No, no, no. We can have, why invent a new therapy? If that's addressed, the paper would be very interesting. So everything's fine, except that I'm trying to make up this new thing called Sesame. Now, this is not actually the kind of comments I was expecting from the journal, but that's what I've got. Anyway, Susie was kind of outraged. And I refer clearly in there to the fact that there is a Sesame Institute, and I have quoted from publications of the Sesame Institute. So anyway, we'll try and clear those things up and make it acceptable by November the 19th. So that is the situation. Now, my final thing to say is just how in all this do you keep it? How are you actually keeping your integrity as a Sesame therapist, as the healer and the teacher, and you want to be? But yeah, the healer's got to be paramount, and it's a Sesame healer that is paramount, and nothing of what we believe must be compromised. That's my total principle. You know, if it were demanded by some journal comments that if I break any of that in any way, that's it. I would take it out and submit it elsewhere. So, to me, the most important thing is the Sesame practice, and I hope that it will be possible for a journal to accept this and for other people to read about it and learn from us. But you know, the editor of the journal says, oh, he thinks it's really interesting and important, and please can I try and get it resubmitted by, you know, he's welcoming. But anyway, the point is that we, for the sake of ourselves, our professional Sesame practice and our clients, we've just got to hold that safe, and then know we're doing that and go forward confidently.
Thank you, Cath. We'll take a moment just maybe to talk in twos and threes, and what I'd like you to head up with is something that caught your imagination from what Cath was saying. Welcome to people who have come in bits of that. Good to see you. To let you know also that two of our research presenters this evening can't be here for illness and a family matter that's come up. So I have one presentation here, but the two who are here, thank you for expanding your time. And just to kick that off, so something that catches your interest or something you didn't know about, talk from that place rather than trying to give each other a knowledge base of what you do know. I think what I'm remembering is this thing of the emperor's new clothes. And what you're talking about, Cath, these two people who have got to garb themselves up with something to say in response to one mirror. And how interesting that the dress that they wear is so different. There's a kind of wearing a garment, I think, within academia that we don't meet somehow. There's a mismatch somewhere. And I'm just throwing that in. So enjoy your mismatches, have a little conversation, and we'll come back maybe in 5 minutes for an open space before we move on. So 2s or 3s, it doesn't really matter. And what you've been talking about, your reactions to what you've heard.
Yes, I've got some paper here. So anybody's got any?
I wonder what the feeling was when you heard the feedback.
Frustration. Frustration.
Yeah, okay. I snorted actually,
Yeah,
as you probably
I'm
heard.
shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because?
How dare they? Like we can feel what you, how you speak. I imagine is how you write and more.
Yeah,
What are they talking about? Yeah. But then you said that you weren't shocked.
No, I wasn't shocked, but only because it's, from what I can gather, sorry to come in so late, that this particular journal is in the arena of arts and health, and I think there's a real kind of I think it's a complex area or relationship with arts and health, the arts therapies and arts and health, because arts and health is usually about people who have not had therapeutic training, who are kind of artists in healthcare environments. So this is completely new for some. I don't know all, but some. And so there's something about the context and laying the kind of having to find the language that is digestible to the audience. And in a way, there is a different audience, and it is a different audience, and I think there's something about kind of having to be educative which is what you're clearly trying to do in terms of how you're describing what you're doing, but I also think it's a new area where, for instance, lots of arts therapists are being replaced currently by artists.
Yeah.
And so there's something about how we can kind of really cross-fertilise in this arena by finding language that is kind of mutual. And so I don't think it's about compromising our language and your language, but I think sometimes it means that we have to provide so much more context and more kind of we have to somehow create a bridge between what we do and what they understand and know about. So I think it's real almost an area of developing that relationship between arts therapies, drama therapy, Sesame, and the arts in health. It's a sort of I think it's a growing relationship, and you're kind of creating a bridge there by publishing in that area. But I think it needs a lot of how to make things digestible and understandable, and providing loads of context.
Yes.
There's something about forgetting what other people don't know, and making assumptions that if you say Laban, it is understood in Sesame terms what that means. That was one of the things I noticed when you were talking from people who are in the room who don't know what Laban would mean. There's a shorthand that we forget the things that other people don't know.
I haven't read my paper through again since this. I only got a day before yesterday. I've been talking with my supervisor and so on. But I really did try to spell out what Sesame was about. I quoted all sorts of things from the Sesame leaflet. I did my best explaining the bases of Sesame and how we work with it. However, one can spell out things a bit more, like if they don't feel that the Laban fundamentals were well enough. But the second person thought it was all fine. She understood it and thought it was, oh, this is so great to present things through vignettes and do this and that and the other. She didn't have a problem with the language at all. It was just, she just thought, why say this is something different? She's obviously a dance therapist. Because therapists do write for this journal as well. And I actually quoted from a previous article in the journal, which was by a Laban person. So, I refer to that in my article. So they actually do have therapists. And there are therapists on the board. But, who is, I have no idea who the people are, but I said the second one's got to be a dance therapist. So, but how she didn't know about Sesame was rather disappointing.
Any last?
Shows me need to tell people what Sesame is.
And they know what the arts therapies are.
Indeed.
Any last thing that needs to just be spat out or thrown in?
I was really taken with the image of the archer, what's said about the Greek, coming from the word hand. I was thinking about the hand of the writer or the researcher, and the hand of the archer. I was remembering a Seamus Heaney poem that he wrote after the death of his mother, where he spoke of striking the linear black. So that relaxed and alluring blow is talking about coal, and how he would strike the coal just right so it halved, And I think there's something about archery, psychically, I think, that we can communicate in our work, which perhaps, shouldn't be compromised. I like what you said at the end about not keeping with some authenticity, but for me it's in the poetics maybe of the communication, rather than, I think that communicates the multifaceted nature of therapeutic work. So I'm just left with the image of CHIRON and the archer, and how we can do that psychically as well with language.
Cath, thank you, and for being a wounded researcher, and thanks to you. So we're going to go on, just to kind of warm up context again. This is an evening where we're gathering people who've been regular attenders at these research evenings and asking them to make their presentation. So Elaine Ambrose, we're going to move into a completely different realm. We're trotting over to church. Sesame, imagination and ... theology. Our little brief is: Sesame remembers something that the church has forgotten, that people have within them the depths of imagination where soul and spirit touch, and where creativity enables people to become all they might be. Jesus, the master storyteller, knew this. He gave holy wine for sacred communion, and turned water into fine wine for partying and playing and having fun. The theology I'm working with reframes who the church serves, so that people can be touched and healed. So Elaine's part of doing a PhD in your second year.
Just coming to third.
Coming into third, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed and been inspired by several Sesame workshops. I particularly remember Andrew's, your introduction to phenomenology and soft language, which has been invaluable to me, because I'm very much attempting to bring soft value, soul language, into hardcore academic theology, and that's no mean task, I tell you. So when Mary invited me to give a little presentation tonight, I was on the one hand thrilled to bits, but me being me, I immediately went to, what on earth can I bring as a theologian to Sesame? But I hope
what I want to share with you is that the PhD research I'm doing is with a view to hopefully presenting a good theology of inclusivity. And so I hope within that there are little bits and pieces that will resonate and cross with what Sesame does. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of snapshots and give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the work that I'm doing. So I hope you enjoy it. I do hope you take something from it. Now, I love the church. I love the church with a passion. I really, really do. And sometimes I completely struggle with what it can be. I love what the church stands for, who it serves and represents. I love that it presents a loving Heavenly Father, a reconciling and redeeming Son, and an inspiring, healing and encouraging Holy Spirit. And you might think that an institution that has that at the core of it would be a fantastic place to be all the time. But of course it's people that make up the church. So in reality it's not always perfect. Well, far from perfect, really. We know that people can be magnificent, amazing creatures, kind, loving, compassionate. And we can be overbearing rule makers, self-righteous, and at times not very clever with what we have. Church overall should be a welcoming place, a place of love, of healing, of reconciliation, and always with a willingness to help, always protect, always hold people in their time of need or crisis, regardless of how big or small people's faith is, or what colour, age, social status, gender or sexuality they might be. And you know, there are churches like that, passionate and vibrant, where people are fed and housed. The homeless are housed and the unemployed are helped to find work. People who are sick or broken are nurtured and cared for. Addicts are helped. The tired are rested. And where there's injustice, it's stood up against. Churches like that can nurture not just our spirituality, but our souls, the very depths of who we are in all our strengths and weaknesses, encouraging us to be whole and healthy human beings in a place of safety where we can learn and grow and mature together. To be honest though, some churches should probably come with a health warning. We can visit a church and feel anything but welcome. We're invisible. Sometimes we can be made to feel totally without value, small, worthless. And sometimes the word of the church is far more important than the word of God. God is, in my understanding, the best kind of midwife. No nonsense, tough, practical, but infinitely patient, endlessly loving, and compassionate beyond words. And his favourite client or patient is each and every one of us. But the way the church occasionally presents who or what God is, I think would be forgiven for thinking he's either some despotic professor with a big stick in one hand and a rule book in the other, ready to beat the heck out of us in a heartbeat, or is some spaced out distant hippie so laid back that he treats us all like we're on our own and anything goes. Why do we seem so able in the church to get it wrong? I can think of several reasons, but I believe one of the biggest issues in the church is our failure with imagination. We seem to leave it behind. We forget all about it. Sometimes we even actively suppress it. Imagination is something Sesame has taken to heart and embraced as central to its understanding of what it means to have and be a soul. Now, you and I both all know, that imagination is at the very heart of soul. And it's there, together with insight, experience, memory, that imagination, joined together with Sesame's creativity of movement and playfulness, releases in people a freedom and a healing of mind and emotions that other forms of therapy can't always reach and sometimes can't begin to touch. Sesame has, what I think, the church has sadly lost over time. And the more I think about it, pray about it, and research it, the more it astounds me that the church has all but left behind something so beautiful and powerful, where love and compassion and healing are concerned. Church is generally too heady, too spiritual, too shallow. Church has forgotten the depths that human beings have. And that's all the more amazing to me when I consider who is central to the church, and that is Jesus. Now, whether we are people of faith or non-faith, and whether our faith is Christian or Jewish or Islamic, whether we have a Western faith or an Eastern faith, we probably all actually have an opinion about Jesus. And some of those opinions will be very diverse, very, very different. But wherever we stand, whatever we think, whatever we believe about Jesus, I know that there is one thing that we would all absolutely agree on, and that was he was a stunningly good storyteller. When we look at his stories and parables, they are brilliant, sometimes funny, often moving, occasionally gripping or heartbreaking. The lost coin, the lost sheep, the persistent widow, the prodigal son, the talents, the sower, the pearl of great price, the thief at midnight, the wise and foolish maidens, and many, many more. Beautiful stories, always relevant to everyday life, even today, and filled with pictures about what really satisfies the heart, about relationship, compassion and forgiveness, mercy and faithfulness, always wise and inspiring words, and always pointing towards how to live and love better. Why was Jesus such a good storyteller? Because at the heart of what he spoke about in his stories was his imagination. Now, for me as a Christian, Jesus is Lord of everything. But through his stories and his parables, what really gets me is his mastery with imagination. He knew that imagination enables people to grasp truths and wonderment much, much more easily, and not just with our heads and our spirit, but with our hearts and souls. Jesus was and is imaginative and creative. Sesame is imaginative and creative. The church, well, it's not very creative or imaginative. The church believes in a triune God that created everything out of nothing but his imagination. That God creatively and imaginatively gave 10 beautiful commandments. He creatively and imaginatively called a people to become a nation and live in his love. He called the Hebrew people to creatively and imaginatively live by the Torah, the Jewish law. And ultimately he gave himself creatively and imaginatively in and through Jesus Christ, by way of his life, his ministry, his death and resurrection. So when did the church begin to lose its sense of imagination? I'd even say God-given imagination. Well, certainly for Europe and the Western world in general, I think it began when the early church shifted gear around what was perceived as the world of the daemon or daimon. The church realised that the general idea was that there was heaven, where divine beings dwelt, and then there was the earth, where humankind and everything natural lived, and then there was the underworld, where all things supernatural and preternatural dwelt, and where people went when they died. And of course it was also believed that the god Hermes transcended all three realms. The daemons could be guides, they could be benevolent, helpful, encouraging, sometimes mischievous, even downright malevolent sometimes, but they were all regarded with the utmost respect. And the stories and myths around these beings, and of course the gods as well, and humankind's interaction with them, was what people used to gain insight and understanding around life's problems, difficulties, heartaches. And so most issues were explored and understood imaginatively, soulfully. And then the church split the world of the daemon into angels and demons, into good and evil, dualistic and separate, heaven and hell. And of course it was no longer Hermes that transcended the three realms, but Christ. And the myths and stories that people used to daily work through problems and gain insight disappeared. And in their place was Christianity. All well and good when it was lived as Christ wanted it to be lived. Unfortunately, people being people, we're so good at getting in the way of life and what living is about. And we get in the way of other people's lives. And we see difficulties as only bad things to be solved and moved on from as quickly as possible, rather than as places for reflection and discovering purpose and meaning. One event that really revealed quite starkly something of the church's attitude towards imagination occurred in Italy in 1497, at the height of the Renaissance. In Florence, people loved their works of art, great literature, fine clothes, and all things of beauty. And there was a fundamentalist, charismatic priest, Girolamo Savonarola, who recognised that the growing indulgence with materialism, art and beauty, was beginning to get in the way of spiritual matters and commitment to God. Now, Savonarola could have, on behalf of the church, encouraged people to get a little perspective, to pay attention to what they were doing and get their priorities right. But what actually happened was quite remarkable. Savonarola convinced the people of Florence that everything to do with art and beauty was sinful and therefore should be destroyed. In the Piazza della Signoria, the people of Florence built an enormous pyramid of carnival masks, costumes, beautiful clothes, ornaments, mirrors, wigs, perfumes, Italian and Latin books of poetry, paintings by Lorenzo di Credi, Bartolomeo, and others. Some even mention Botticelli, but the evidence is a little bit shaky on that. And then this whole mountain of gorgeous things was set on fire and reduced to ash. You might have heard the phrase, bonfire of the vanities. This is where it comes from. And today, from time to time, we hear of right-wing evangelical Christians doing much the same thing with books they don't like or agree with, or music CDs of favourite singers who might unexpectedly come out as gay, or they boycott films they don't approve of and think they shouldn't be seen. I still remember the hoo-ha in the UK back in 1979 when The Life of Brian came out. I loved that film. It gained accusations of blasphemy, but it was really simply a brilliant take on how stupid we can be over religion. Conservative Christians did a similar thing with Martin Scorsese's film, The Last Temptation of Christ, based on Nikos Kazantzaki's book of the same title. A heart-searching metaphor to think about, to really get to grips with and reflect on. But the church just said no. Jesus gave the church the Eucharist meal, or Holy Communion, to remember him by, to share bread and wine together as a uniting piece of drama, a holy rite, something to receive with thanksgiving and a recognition of his broken body and spilled blood on the cross when he would be crucified for the world. Communion is a beautiful and imaginative metaphor that feeds and nurtures Christians when we eat the bread and we drink the wine. But while we remember that the Lord gave us holy wine for communion, we completely forget he also turned water into the most perfect, delicious wine for a 4-day wedding party. The church has a Lord that calls us to holy, sacrificial, high moral living. And we have a Lord who calls us to live life to the full and have a good time in abundance. Have a look at the Gospels sometime. Jesus knew how to party and have a good time. Dinner parties with great conversation and wonderful food, and wedding parties full of dancing and laughter. Jesus definitely danced. How can we be sure? Because at a Jewish wedding there's no such thing as a wallflower. Everybody dances. The church, when it comes down to it, needs greater balance. And I believe this can only be found when the church rediscovers its lost and forgotten imagination. In my research, I occasionally find theologians writing about exactly that, about the softer values of soul rather than spiritual values, about the church reimagining itself as a place of inclusion rather than exclusion. And this excites me. This gives me hope for the church. It gives me hope that it's possible for us to relearn how to balance imagination with reality, soul with spirit, and become once again far more than our current frailties limits us to being. Thank you for your listening.
We're heading towards a cup of tea, but we'll use the same principle of just having a moment. And as you were talking, I was reminded how Billy Lindquist, who started Sesame, was in the church, and how the Sesame office sits on the side wing of a church. And you know, there's this kind of like living symbol. Here we are in a church, and yet we're not the church, but we're doing this healing work that talks about depth treasure, though we would not give it the same names as the church, but something around how her going around churches in those early days, doing these little presentations that she found so grossly dissatisfactory, unsatisfactory, and then the dream coming that took us into imagination, the art. So there's a kind of an agreement here, or something that fits. But let's do the same thing. Let's just have, you know, tiny little buzz groups, diddly-diddly-doos, come back and see where we are. Church, Sesame, imagination, and then a cup of tea. Let's go. Same little groups, producing, but just saying what came out of that for us. What was, yeah. Go you two.
I was really moved by your presentation, and a word that came to my mind is mystery, as a bridge between Sesame and the church, and staying with the mystery. I remembered what a priest told me when I was back to Greece. I come from Greece. He said, you and I share something we both know, but we don't know. So when you were saying about imagination, I was thinking, is imagination also God? Like, is there a point that images become living beings, independent from us, that we can relate with them?
Yeah, I think that is a huge part of the mystery of God. I think, I mean, in fairness, that's probably the hugest chunk of God, that he is mystery. We can't pin him down. You can't box God up. And quite often in human language, we can really only talk about what God isn't, if you think about it, because we don't know who and what he is. Because you can't get hold of him in any sense. I think this is why Jesus is so precious, because he's tangible. You know, he was flesh and blood on the earth. So, but yeah, mystery is a huge part, and I often find that when I am tired and fractious with the church, I go back to some of the writings of the ancient mystics. There are Christian mystics around, but they're very hard to find, and I find that incredibly sad, actually, because the mysticism side of Christianity that really deals with the mystery and not awesomeness of it all, but just that sense of being part of something very precious that is alive and stuff you don't know, close to the earth. There's something so gentle in that faith. I think that's probably why you often find that the mystics today are usually shut up in little monasteries somewhere. You know, they're not walking around us necessarily. But there's great wisdom and a real gentleness in that. And what tends to get in the way, as we all know, whether we have faith or not, it's life is so fast. It's full of technology and electricity and fast cars and commuting and work, and you never have time to breathe. And there's no time for God. There's no time for our spirits wherever we want to actually take them. There's no time to sit and gently drop into sorrow. And I think this is especially why the work of Sesame is so vital and so important. There is a real preciousness, because Sesame speaks soul for me, and I'm sure for many of you, if not all of you. Sesame speaks soul, and it encourages this sense of just dropping down, stepping back, breathing, moving in your body, finding your comfort within your body and in your space, finding your comfort with other people in relationship. this is what the church should be. And it's like, we don't damn well do it. And I don't get it half the time. But I really honestly think it's because we're so full of broken people, and we don't get that we're broken people. And if we could actually all say, you know, actually get up into the pulpit and say, do you know, I feel like absolute shit today. Honesty, yes, but you're going, how are you? I'm fine. Do you know what I mean? You know, the daughter could be pregnant, their house has just burnt down, their dog has died, all sorts of things. I'm fine. It's like I find myself with friends in church. I'll say, how are you doing? And they'll say, I'm fine. I'll say, this is me. How are you really? And then I would actually get a real conversation. We're so scared in the church to look weak. We're all meant to be these happy, clappy little Jesus freaks. And I get so tired of it. That's not real. That's not real. That's not, you know, that's not what the church is about. And if you can't be real, how on earth can you reach out to somebody else and bring healing into their lives? A word of comfort, you know? And I just get so frustrated with it all, because we could be so much more for people. And faith and religion be done with it, you know? We should just be something special for somebody, anybody, regardless of who they are, what they believe. There should be a healing that comes to the church. And so much of what we do, it's just not happening. There are pockets. There are pockets, I promise you. There are churches you can walk into and think, oh, I can breathe here. You feel it as you walk in. But in general, we just don't know what we're doing half the time. It's awful.
One more question before a cup of tea. One more question. Or comment. Dina, did you? You were probably with something.
So yeah, just thank you for the way you spoke in the presentation and just now. It's very inspiring. Thank you. You used the word imagination, and I would so many times would not use this word, and instead I would use inspiration, as if imagination is something that we make up, whereas inspiration is we allow spirit in, and I think this is what is mutual in all truth that comes from the love of God or whatever that is for the connection with the spirit for people, and when we find the profound truth, and when we see something happening in Sesame, there is a connection with spirit that is going on, I mean, many people might not believe in spirit, but in Sesame work, I consider it very spiritual in the end, not in a religious way, but the soul and the spirit somehow is inside at this moment is met, and at some moments it's met in a Sesame session or when you connect.
Yes, I agree with you. I would argue that you cannot be inspired unless you have imagination, because it's the imagination that gets captured by inspiration. When inspiration comes into you, that's what moves the depth of who you are. And unless you can, in your heart or your mind or somewhere in the dark recesses of our bodies, wherever our souls and spirits sit, that's where you capture the story and the essence of what is being imparted to you. So inspiration, I think inspiration comes from something external or someone external into your eyes, your ears, your heart, a feeling, whatever. But it comes in to you. What you already have in place is your imagination. And it's that imagination that goes, oh, yummy, yes. There's your inspiration. The inspiration comes in and you become inspired. But I would hesitate to think, I don't think you can be inspired without external stimulus. Would you say otherwise?
External stimulus, like something physical, or as we talk in spirit, in
Yeah, I mean, if I
it's not necessarily
stand on a
external.
mountain in the Himalayas, you can't help but be inspired.
Yes.
But it's because of this glorious, majestic view that's coming into your being. I could stand here and think about the Himalayas. I wouldn't necessarily get inspired because that's internal. It's my, But if you've been to the Himalayas and you're sitting there and you are enthusiastic and full of wonder and you talk to me, that will feed my imagination and inspire me. So it is external, coming into me, and it's through imagination. And I think sometimes we don't practice with our imaginations. It might sound a funny thing to say, but you know how sometimes when you're kids, when we are kids, have been kids, you'll get this because of Sesame. You have no inhibitions. You have no inhibitions. You might want to stand on a crowded train platform and race the train. As a kid, you'd have no inhibitions about racing the train with all the crowds on the platform watching you. Would you do that as an adult? No, because you lose the practice of that playfulness. And I know you get that because this is one of the aspects that is so fantastic about Sesame, that is encouraged to take hold of you again. And it's the same with imagination. I think as we grow up, we get our partners and our kids, and we take on responsibilities of a job and this, that and the other, and imagination becomes less playful. And we need to, I think, really take check on that and work with rekindling imagination in ourselves.
Well, there you are. Thank you, Elaine. I think you've brought a whole different dynamic which belongs and is new and can be offensive, and yet is sexy because it's alive. It's got fire about it. So a big thank you. The church is sexy. Well, there's the next. I wish. Let's take until 25 past, a cup of tea. There's only one kettle, so some of you may have to move fast, but there's tea and coffee and biscuits and Halloween trick-or-treats. The spirit of the evening. Other discussion. And just to feel what your level of absorption is. This means checking out with your body and dropping down into your soul and praying and then coming up with an answer. What do we think?
Just channeling at the moment.
Yeah, sorry, I'm speeding.
So would that be the only other paper?
Yes. No, then I've got another 5 that I have to give myself. Yeah. They just to give people the overall, there were 2 other presenters who were meant to be here this evening, and they couldn't be for very valid reasons. We'd have been much tighter with Elaine and Cath had they not been here. But Esther was going to be doing something on fundraising for projects, and because she's sick, she has sent a handout which can be given out or can be emailed to you. So that will be Esther's way of turning up this evening. But Basia has a paper here which she left in the gift of whether I read it or not. She's very happy that it's either read or not read. So I just need a feel for what you would like, or whether it's time just to have a little bit more talk about your own harvesting and what needs to be pulled out of this evening for your task. And that you've now been told, Shannon, and come back to me in 5 minutes.
I'm sure Basia.
Go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I would very much prefer to hear that from herself presenting her
Yes.
thing, because it makes a difference somehow. Although it is
Yes.
an
Absolutely.
objective piece of work if you just read it.
Yeah.
But I do, because I've met her. I would really like to hear her present this.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other takes on that?
It's true, if it's going to be the real thing, as it were, to come from the heart of the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's more exciting, isn't it, when it comes from the person who's presented it. Because you can feel it, you can really draw into it. It's a bit like, if you get something,
Yeah.
I'm going to read it, okay. So, but if someone presents it, it's their passion inside them, when it comes out, it draws you into what
Yeah.
being said.
Okay. I think that's probably right. That there's something here that has a soulful quality or a human quality about we communicate best what comes from ourselves. And this is something that does come. I'd like to just read you one little bit which touched me as I was reading this over before. And maybe that could be part of our discussion. And she's talking a lot about, Henry and I were talking about it, how we as art therapists and people who use the arts have still become divided in our divisions of music therapy and drama therapy and all these special things, and yet we're really all using creativity as a means to bring through the healthy, to move against the pathological, and to take another stance where there is health taken for granted rather than description, and Basie is talking a lot about that. And then she just has a rather poetic bit when she's been talking about the collection of disorders in NICE guidelines and DSM. And she's talking about the two languages. And it's just quite a short list of words that she would call, here are a few examples from the language of diagnostic. So hear it like a litany. Chemical imbalance, insanity, abnormality, madness, disorder, imbalance, unhappiness, tension, discontentment, disenchantment, confusion, oppression, absence, non-meaning, meaninglessness, unaware, obsessed, possessed, repressed, disintegrated, depressed, abused, injured, unprotected, vulnerable, victim, toxic. And then a few verbs drawn from the language of therapy. To heal, to empower, to care, to enable, to contain, to make aware, to open, to create space, to relax, to soothe, to console, protect, interpret, diagnose, detoxify, make bearable, to distance, to reassure, enrich, deepen, improve, intensify, and amplify, etc. I'd like to tell you a little story which comes to me through the Irish poet David Whyte, who people may know, and if you don't know him, he's really worth looking up, W-H-Y-T-E. And he tells of a time when he'd been working for a charitable organisation that was doing good work, and he'd played a very important part in this. But he was desperately exhausted and longing for rest of some kind. And he had a good friend who was a monk, and they used to gather on kind of like evenings, and with a good bottle of wine and a fire they would sit and talk. And it was one of these evenings in his exhaustion. And he said to his friend, the monk, "I'm so tired and I just need to stop." And the monk seemingly spoke to him and he said, "David, it feels like that for many years you've been following an abstract idea it's been growing in you, but it hasn't really harvested. It hasn't been ripe. But your exhaustion now is that it is ripe. And what you have to do when you're absolutely knackered, done, finished, is harvest. Rather than stop back or go to sleep, you need to gather what has been abstract, what you've been embodying, and begin to put it out. Otherwise, the fruit will rot on the tree and you won't be able to move on to the next thing. Your exhaustion is the gate of your being ready to move on to the next thing. But before you go, you have to harvest what has ripened. And that's been with me for a long time. And I wanted to bring it this evening, maybe for our contemplative talking at the end of this evening, of what might we need to harvest that's ripe, that could be forgotten. And it'll be different because some of us are doing a new training and some of us are doing training and some of us are exploring and some of us are, internationally all over the place doing things. We're in different places, but there's something around what needs to be harvested. And I'd like us, if we could, just to spend, maybe saying we've decided to go against the hearing of another paper, to maybe seed something of those thoughts for each other. And then we've got a little harvest ritual that Elena and I have just made up in the break at the end. When you're exhausted, what needs to be harvested? I think we'll just leave an open space where we can throw in. It doesn't matter if it's silence, we don't need to fill it, but if something comes, just allow that to be seeded.